You watch as the child walks toward the altar, her small hand trembling in her father's grasp. She's wearing the double crown, red and white, symbols of power that seem too heavy for her narrow shoulders. The priests chant in the temple's dim interior, but their voices sound hollow, uncertain. This isn't a coronation, it's a wedding. And the man beside her, the one slipping a gold bracelet onto her wrist while the sun streams through the open roof, is both her father and, as of this moment, her husband. She's 13 years old. Her name is Akhenaten, which means beloved of the Aten. And the man transforming her from daughter to queen is Akhenaten, Pharaoh of Egypt, the most powerful ruler on earth. In this moment, watching her childhood end in a ceremony that mingles family love with something far more complex, you realize you're witnessing not just a marriage, but the collision of divine ambition with human cost. I'd love to hear where in the world you're watching from. It's genuinely incredible that we can all gather around a story this ancient, this strange, and find ourselves equally fascinated by what humans are capable of when they believe they're acting on behalf of the gods. This is Egypt, 1338 BCE, in a city that didn't exist a decade earlier. The place is called Akhenaten, Horizon of the Aten, built in the desert by a pharaoh who abandoned the ancient capital of Thebes and the gods his people had worshipped for 3,000 years. Akhenaten declared that everything Egypt believed about the divine was wrong. There were no gods, only one, the Aten, the visible sun disk that gave life to all creation. He built a new capital in virgin desert to escape the influence of the old priesthood. He created a new art style that showed royal families in intimate domestic scenes rather than frozen in eternal poses. And when he needed heirs to continue his revolution, when his wife Nefertiti had given him 6 daughters but no son, he made a decision that would shock even a culture familiar with royal incest. He married his own daughters, one after another, transforming them from children into queens in ceremonies that blurred every boundary between family and state. The documentation exists. In temple reliefs showing Akhenaten in positions traditionally reserved for chief queen, in diplomatic letters referring to the king's daughter, the queen, in DNA evidence extracted from royal mummies that reveals the genetic consequences of these unions. This isn't myth or propaganda. This is what happened when one man decided that preserving his vision of truth was worth sacrificing his own children on the altar of dynastic necessity. Akhenaten hadn't always been a revolutionary. Born as Amenhotep IV around 1353 BCE, he inherited a kingdom at its zenith. His father, Amenhotep III, had ruled for 38 years of unprecedented prosperity, building temples that glittered with gold, maintaining an empire that stretched from Nubia to Syria. The young prince should have simply continued this tradition, honoring Amun-Ra and the vast pantheon that had blessed Egypt for millennia. But something happened in those early years of his reign, something that turned a conventional prince into a religious zealot willing to tear apart the foundations of his civilization. The transformation began subtly. In his 4th year as pharaoh, Amenhotep IV started building temples to the Aten at Karnak itself, in the shadow of Amun's greatest sanctuary. The priests of Amun watched with growing alarm as this minor solar deity was elevated above their ancient god. Then, in his 5th year, the young pharaoh made a declaration that sent shockwaves through the kingdom. He would no longer honor the name Amenhotep, which meant Amun is satisfied. From now on, he would be Akhenaten, effective for the Aten. His wife Nefertiti became Neferneferuaten. Beautiful is the beauty of the Aten. Even their daughters received new names praising their god, but renaming wasn't enough. By his 6th year, Akhenaten made a decision that proved how serious his revolution was. He would abandon Thebes entirely and build a completely new city dedicated solely to the Aten. The site he chose lay 200 miles north of Thebes on the east bank of the Nile, where limestone cliffs formed a natural amphitheater. Each morning, the sun appeared to rise directly from these cliffs, a daily miracle that reinforced his theology. The city was built with astonishing speed using standardized blocks called talatat that could be carried by a single man and assembled quickly. Within 2 years, the basic infrastructure was complete. Palaces, temples, administrative buildings, residential quarters for the officials who followed their pharaoh into the desert. The great temple of the Aten dominated the city's heart, but it looked nothing like traditional Egyptian temples. There were no dark, mysterious chambers, no hidden sanctuaries accessible only to priests. The entire structure was open to the sky. Hundreds of offering tables stretched across vast courtyards where the sun's rays could touch every corner. The architecture itself made a theological statement. This god required no intermediaries, no secret rituals, no elaborate mythology. The divine was visible to all, the sun itself, sustaining life through its daily journey across the heavens. The art that emerged from Akhenaten was equally revolutionary. For 3,000 years, Egyptian art had followed rigid conventions showing pharaohs as eternally young and physically perfect. Suddenly, reliefs appeared, showing genuine human emotion, the royal family embracing, children playing, intimate moments of domestic life. Akhenaten himself was depicted with an elongated skull, narrow shoulders, wide hips, and a protruding belly. Features so distinctive that scholars still debate whether they represented actual physical characteristics or symbolic representations of his theology. Some reliefs show him with breasts, suggesting an androgynous quality meant to embody both masculine and feminine divine principles. In these early years, the royal family seemed almost utopian in the art that celebrated them. Akhenaten and Nefertiti are shown in tender scenes with their daughters, 6 girls born between 1348 and 1340 BCE. Meritaten was the eldest, followed by Meketaten, Ankesenpaten, Neferneferuaten Tasherit, Neferneferure, and Setapenre. The reliefs show them as real children rather than miniature adults, playing beneath the Aten's rays, each ray ending in a tiny hand offering the Ankh symbol of life. The images projected warmth, intimacy, a royal family bound by genuine affection. But beneath this domestic tranquility, a crisis was building. 6 daughters and no son. In the rigid world of pharaonic succession, this presented a catastrophe. Any heir would need to be thoroughly committed to Atenism to prevent restoration of the old religion after Akhenaten's death. This eliminated potential successors from other branches of the royal family whose theological commitments were questionable. The answer Akhenaten devised was as elegant in its logic as it was disturbing in its execution. He would marry his own daughters, keeping succession within his immediate family while doubling the concentration of divine royal blood in any children born from these unions. The process began after Nefertiti's mysterious disappearance from historical records around Akhenaten's 12th year of rule. Whether she died, fell from favor, or transformed into a co-ruler under a different name remains one of Egyptology's enduring mysteries. But after her disappearance, the reliefs begin to show Meritaten in positions traditionally reserved for the chief queen. She stands beside her father during religious ceremonies. She receives the life-giving rays of the Aten. She wears the regalia of queenship. By the 13th year of Akhenaten's reign, she had officially become his wife. Meritaten was probably 16 years old. The psychological complexity of her situation is almost impossible to grasp. She had grown up surrounded by art celebrating intimate family bonds, images of herself as a beloved daughter playing with her sisters beneath the Aten's benevolent rays. Now she was expected to transform filial love into conjugal duty, to become simultaneously daughter and wife to the same man. The reliefs from this period show her in the exact poses that Nefertiti once occupied, creating unsettling visual echoes where the daughter replaces the mother in every sense. The theological justification was internally consistent within Akhenaten's religious framework. The Aten was described as both father and mother of creation, containing both male and female principles. The royal family, as earthly representatives of divine power, should mirror this cosmic unity. By marrying his daughter, Akhenaten was creating an earthly reflection of divine self-generation. Any child born from this union would be doubly royal, carrying concentrated divine blood unprecedented in Egyptian history. But theology couldn't mask the human cost. Palace life at Akhenaten must have become psychologically labyrinthine for the daughters who watched their eldest sister transform from sibling to stepmother. The younger daughters, some still children, lived in a household where traditional family boundaries had dissolved. They must have understood, with growing dread, that their own futures might follow the same pattern. Around Akhenaten's 15th year, the situation became even more complex. Meritaten married Shmenkhkare, a mysterious figure who may have been Akhenaten's brother or adopted son, making her simultaneously the wife of two pharaohs, her father and his co-regent. This arrangement freed Akhenaten to pursue another marriage that would further concentrate divine power. He elevated his next eldest daughter, Ankhesenpaaten, to the position of chief queen. This young woman, who couldn't have been more than 13 or 14 years old, found herself at the center of her father's desperate attempt to preserve his revolution through bloodline. The name Ankhesenpaaten means she lives for the Aten, and it proved prophetic. The reliefs showing her beside her father-husband are among the most unsettling artifacts from the Amarna period. A prepubescent girl wearing the regalia of queenship, standing in poses that mimic earlier images of Nefertiti, her own mother or stepmother depending on which scholarly theory you accept. The iconography forces viewers into uncomfortable recognition of what they're seeing. A child bride serving dynastic necessity disguised as theological imperative. These weren't merely ceremonial arrangements. In the tomb of Meriret II at Amarna, reliefs show what appears to be Akhenaten in intimate family scenes with his daughter wives, scenes that echo the domestic tranquility depicted earlier with Nefertiti. The king embraces his daughter queens, shares meals with them, participates in private rituals of family life. The images suggest genuine marital relationships rather than purely political theater. The death of Mekhetaten, another daughter, during this period provides tragic evidence of the physical reality of these relationships. The scenes in the royal tomb showing this young princess's death are among the most emotionally powerful images in Egyptian art. The royal family mourns over a woman lying on a birthing bed, with midwives and attendants surrounding the scene. A wet nurse holds a newborn infant. Mekhetaten died in childbirth, possibly after giving birth to her father's child. She was perhaps 14 years old. The relief doesn't identify the father of her child, but her death during the period when father-daughter marriages were being contracted within the royal family raises questions that the archaeological record cannot definitively answer but cannot ignore. Meanwhile, the empire was crumbling. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence found in Akhenaten's ruins, reveal a pattern of neglect in Egypt's international relations. Vassal kings in Syria and Palestine wrote desperate pleas for military support against invading forces only to receive vague promises or no response at all. "To the king, my lord, my God, my son," wrote Ribhada of Byblos in one of many frantic dispatches. "7 times and 7 times I fall at the feet of the king, my lord. May the king give thought to his city. If this year there are no archers, then all the lands of the king, my lord, will perish." Similar pleas came from rulers throughout the Levant, but Akhenaten's attention was focused inward, on perfecting his earthly paradise and securing his dynasty through increasingly complex family arrangements that consumed his daughters' childhoods in service to theological abstraction. The common people found little to love in Akhenaten's revolution. The Aten was a distant intellectual deity offering none of the personal comfort provided by gods like Isis or Hathor. The festivals that had marked the rhythm of Egyptian life for centuries were replaced by ceremonies focused entirely on the royal family's relationship with their solar god. Traditional religion had offered hope. the promise of eternal life for those who lived according to Mayat, divine order. Atenism provided only the remote beneficence of the sun disk, accessible primarily through the pharaoh and his family. When Akhenaten died around 1336 BCE, the circumstances remain mysterious, possibly from illness, possibly from genetic disorders caused by inbreeding. His revolution died with him. His immediate successor was probably Neferuaten, possibly Nefertiti ruling under a new name, who attempted to maintain Atenism while addressing practical problems. But the forces of restoration were already in motion. The child who emerged from this tangled web of relationships was Tutankhaten, probably 8 or 9 years old when he became pharaoh. Modern DNA analysis confirms that his parents were full siblings, most likely Akhenaten and one of his sister wives. This boy, barely old enough to understand the forces swirling around him, became the vehicle through which Egypt abandoned the Amarna experiment. His wife was Ankhesenpaten, the same girl who had been her father's queen. She had experienced the full complexity of Amarna family arrangements, serving as daughter, wife, and stepmother to various members of the royal house before becoming queen to a boy who may have been her half-brother, nephew, or son. Within 3 years, the young king changed his name from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, honoring Amun, the god Akhenaten had tried to destroy. The court abandoned Akhetaten and returned to Memphis. The great temple of the Aten was closed. A royal decree announced the restoration in language that explicitly condemned the Amarna period. The temples had gone to pieces. Their shrines had become desolate. Their sanctuaries were as if they had never been. The land was topsy-turvy, and the gods turned their backs upon this land. After Tutankhamun's early death, possibly from complications related to genetic disorders, possibly from injuries, General Horemheb seized the throne and launched a campaign of historical erasure unprecedented in its thoroughness. Every mention of Akhenaten's name was chiseled from temple walls. Every statue bearing his likeness was smashed. Akhetaten was systematically dismantled, its stone blocks carted away for other projects. Official king lists simply skipped from Amenhotep III to Horemheb, as if the Amarna period had never existed. The pharaoh, who had dared to challenge the gods, was condemned to the worst fate imaginable in Egyptian belief: to be forgotten, to have his name obliterated from memory, to die a second death in the realm of forgetting. For 3,000 years, the erasure was largely successful. It was only when archaeologists began excavating Amarna's ruins in the late 19th century that the full scope of his revolution began to emerge. The intimate family scenes, the theological texts, the diplomatic letters revealing an empire in decline, and the DNA evidence confirming what the reliefs had suggested. Akhenaten had indeed married his daughters, and the genetic consequences of these unions contributed to the physical problems that plagued the late 18th dynasty. In the Cairo Museum, there's a small limestone relief fragment from Amarna that wasn't destroyed because it was too insignificant for the eraser to notice. It shows 2 figures beneath the Aten's rays: a tall man with an elongated skull and a smaller figure whose size suggests youth. The man's hand rests on the smaller figure's shoulder in a gesture that could be paternal affection or conjugal intimacy. The hieroglyphs are partially damaged, but enough remains to identify them: Akhenaten and Meritaten. The relief captures a moment frozen between 2 interpretations: father with daughter or husband with wife, and refuses to resolve the ambiguity. That ambiguity is precisely what makes it so disturbing, because both interpretations are true. Both were true simultaneously in a household where family roles collapsed into each other, where daughters became mothers to their own siblings, where theological conviction required the sacrifice of childhood itself. Somewhere in the ruins of Akhetaten, beneath the sand that has reclaimed the city Akhenaten built to honor his god, lie the bones of his daughters, Meritaten, Meketaten, Ankhesenpaten. Girls who were born into a revolution that promised to reshape the world and who became instead its human cost, their bodies used to bridge the gap between divine vision and dynastic necessity. They lived in a palace where the boundaries of family dissolved, where love and duty became indistinguishable, where serving their father meant becoming his wife. The reliefs show them smiling beneath the Aten's rays, hands raised in worship, faces carefully composed in expressions of devotion. But the reliefs don't show what they felt, whether they believed in their father's God enough to accept what was asked of them, whether they understood that they were both victims and instruments of a revolution that would erase itself within a generation. The sun still rises over the cliffs at Amarna, just as it did when Akhenaten first saw this place and recognized it as the horizon of his god. But the temples are gone, the palaces are rubble, and the daughters who were promised to the Aten have been silent for more than 3,000 years. Only the questions remain, echoing across millennia. What does it cost to believe you're right? What are you willing to sacrifice, including the people you love, to preserve a vision only you can see? And when the revolution fails, when the names are erased and the city abandoned, who pays the price? The answer stands in those fragments of limestone showing a girl in a crown too heavy for her shoulders, holding her father's hand, walking toward an altar that is also a wedding bed. She paid, they all did, with their childhoods, their bodies, their futures, and history, having remembered to forget them once, still struggles to know what to call them, daughters or queens, or something for which we still have no adequate name.